Density bonuses, Section 37 implementation. The City of Vaughan experience presenter is John MacKenzie, Deputy City Manager, Planning and Growth Management of the City of Vaughan.
Thank you, and good morning, Madam Chair, members of Council, and thank you very much for inviting me here today. First of all, I do want to say thank you to Christine, Alyssa Mahood, and Jason, and Janice Atwood as well. Their tenacity in getting me here today is really remarkable. I saw them at I saw Christine at a presentation I was doing on Section 37 in Toronto at Ryerson, and she approached me and said, you know, this is exactly the kind of thing that our council is grappling with. It looks like Vaughan has been grappling with this for the last few years, and could you come and speak? And they just stayed on me. So luckily I'm here today, and thank you again for the opportunity. I'm so impressed. I was driving around today and seeing all these fantastic developments taking place in the city. It's just great, and you have such a professional team, and I just want to commend you on your team here at the city.
Thank you, John. Can you move the microphone up just
Sure.
a smidge?
Okay, just a smidge. Is that better? Thank you. Okay, so good morning. Why am I here today? And I think the real reason is that the City of Vaughan has been experiencing a wave of intensification. We are, like Hamilton, beneficiaries of major investment and interest on the transit, and our population growth is it's quite a curve. We're jumping from a population right now of 320,000. We'll be at 500 plus by 2041. That's the current estimate, and there's quite a bit of that is in intensification. So I'm briefly going to go through our recent experience creating an up-to-date Section 37 policy. I'm going to talk about how the guidelines were such a key part of this in order for council to be able to get broader stakeholder support for this, the implementation guidelines. I'm going to go through a few case studies. I will touch on some of the affordable housing concerns. We haven't been achieving as much affordable housing, but some of the nearby municipalities, there's been a couple of success stories, and I'll comment on some of that because that seems that's an area of interest, and I'll talk about some of the challenges and opportunities and where we're going next. So again, intensification in the city. Bus rapid transit, we've got 3 new subway stops in Vaughan, regional express rail through Metrolinx. We wanted to make sure that the development happening around all of this transit investment was done in a way that reflected the highest quality of urban design, reflected the community building processes that we went through the secondary plans. And related to Section 37, we have, as you probably have, this gap between what is a level of service that is based on historic levels of service and what is the planned level of service. And that's a real challenge in the municipal sector. So we wanted to try to make sure that we narrowed that gap, if possible, if we could use some of that Section 37 funding to narrow that gap. But we needed a clear and reproducible process for doing this. So the community knew what we were doing, and the development community was going to be on board. Really quickly, and with reference to this map, where you see the red and there's some pink, purple, that's where we have bus rapid transit lines planned. You can see that Spadina subway extension coming north from Steeles going northward into our Vaughan Metropolitan Centre, which will be a population of 30,000 in an area of 200 acres. Just a great deal of intensification with the Barry-Go corridor line going north-south, which will eventually have 15-minute service, two-way all day. There's a great deal of density and intensification happening in these areas, new hospital, etc. So a great deal of investment, and we wanted to make sure that we had a framework for intensification to get some benefit to the community from all of this intensification happening around transit. So we have an official plan, like we had an enabling official plan, not that different than the City of Hamilton one that you saw earlier. We had those enabling policies in the official plan, but I think what we wanted to do was to add some information as we embarked on updating our Section 37 policy. We wanted to add some additional information as to how it can be used and what made sense. We are aware of the Ontario Municipal Board hearing findings related to the nexus argument that the benefit has to be, generally the benefit has to be used in that area. So we wanted to do that, and so we outlined some of this in the official plan policy to try to get some more buy-in and support from everyone. So they knew what we were doing, it was transparent, and everyone eventually came on board. So we started down the road of these revised policies in 2013. We had a lot of questions about how are you going to value this. At the end of the day, people care about how this affects their pro forma. The community cares about what that, and councillors, well, what are we talking about? What is the quantum of this Section 37 benefit? So we retain an appraisal firm in order to, and one of the better ones, GSI, known for their involvement in a lot of these board processes. We retain them to help us develop a clear, reproducible methodology for obtaining a clear benefit, and something that if we needed to go to the OMB to defend, we could. So that was an important step to work on that methodology. We had so many meetings related to this. A lot of it was with the development community and the representatives. There we have the York chapter of Build, or Ontario Home Builders. Here you would have the HHBA, I guess, or there would be that same type of stakeholder discussion that went on for some time. We also had community interest groups that were concerned that Section 37 would, be a, call it a Trojan horse for vertical sprawl. Really, they were concerned that Section 37 was going to be levered as an opportunity to come into these lower density areas and increase the height and densities, and so there was a lot of a discussion that had to take place over that. All of our official plan, our new official plan, which wasn't even that new, what was the conformity amendment to the growth plan, all of it had been subject to a massive OMB appeal, and I know you've had some big ones here in Hamilton as well. We had, I think we're at 160 appeals to the official plan in Vaughan. Eventually, and they're being worked on, and there's been a lot of it that's been mediated, but there's quite a bit of development interest. So the OMB eventually did approve that policy framework that we had established. We did quite a bit of meetings, committee of the whole meetings, where we invited stakeholders if they needed to present anything, and I think the working meetings with the industry helped get support on that. So we eventually got to the point where we had the implementation guidelines supported by council. We talked about a little bit of this before. This is the basis, the crux of the policy, that it has to be a reasonable planning relationship, and that's good planning. And I don't want to, this is a very important thing. Our staff, we will not, and we have a design review panel as well, but we will not be recommending Section 37 or talking about the use of it unless we think it is a good quality development. And so I think that's a very important point to make here. It still has to represent good planning in the public interest, and there still needs to be infrastructure present to support that. We're not going to be recommending increased height and density for a Section 37 benefit if those factors are not met at the outset. Some of this has been discussed before, but I think it's just, I want to talk a little bit about the question that Councillor raised about affordable housing here too, and we talked about the different benefits. We want to make sure that this point is very clear, that these benefits are over and above what could be secured through Planning Act or DC Act contributions. So the public art, the not-for-profit, the cultural facilities, if there are park improvements, it's something that's above a normal level of service. And I think that's very important. A lot of people lose sight of that, and we actually have some pretty testy discussions with this, with the development community or individual developers who fail to make that connection. But we want to make sure that it's over and above. And if it's for public transit, we got to make sure that the site is planned already to maintain those connections to transit, but if it's over and above, and I'll talk about some of those detailed benefits later. For affordable housing, and I just want to make a point about this, maybe it's a good point now, affordable housing is something that we try to seek. In our case, you're a single tier. We have an upper tier regional municipality, so they're the housing provider, so we have to work with them if we're trying to secure something like that. We are working on something like that right now with them, where they would then take on units in the building. Like, we quantify the benefit of that Section 37 increase within and so we get a dollar value of that, and then we somehow work with the housing provider to determine how that's going to work. Is it a number of units that, in our case, York Region Housing is going to take on? Is it a number of, and that's really the way it is. I mean, there are some challenges as to how you access into that, and there's some concerns from developers. Is that a stigma issue? Is there something else? Is there a way do they need separate access or anything like that? Those are types of challenges that have come up in the discussion, but I think right now we've been able to achieve some of that in York Region through working with the developer and working to secure units within the actual buildings in some of these high-rise buildings. We talked about this before. It's really that reasonable planning relationship. What we do, and I think what was mentioned, is the site-specific zoning bylaw amendment. How do we implement this? So we bring forward a bylaw that will identify specifically, and we indicate this in our committee of the whole report, as we move through the development approvals process, we will indicate in our report what the benefits are. That will then be translated into a bylaw with that amount identified clearly in the bylaw, which will then go into that specific reserve that's been set up through finance, and that will be tied to that agreement. And that agreement, all of that comes together towards the latter part of the planning process when we go to committee. So just going back to this official plan policy and the whole process, having that implementation guideline framework was really key. I'm just going to talk about that implementation guideline because I think this is an important part of how council can be involved in this as well. So importantly, we want to make sure that council is insulated in some degree, or councillors, individual ward councillors are insulated in some degree from the criticism that has been either fairly or unfairly targeted toward councillors in the City of Toronto and I think people have read the articles, and there's been articles about how it's a let's make a deal in this ward approach that certain councillor will take, and you're not going to get your project through unless you make a deal with that councillor. So our Mayor Mauricio Bevilacqua and members of council were very concerned about getting negative criticism on this. So one of the things that we worked out with committee, council, stakeholders was that planning staff, staff from a real estate group as well, would work on the negotiations, would manage a lot of these negotiations, taking into account that appraisal methodology and the guidelines we had set up. We would we would of course consult all the local studies that had been prepared in advance, so those secondary plans or those neighborhood studies that had taken place. In some cases they'd be streetscape plans that involved a lot of community consultation, but we would consult those plans and those studies to look at what made sense. And this is a bit of an art. It's not a science, it's an art between the developer, between the community. It's a dance. It's a dance. Yeah, fair. It is a dance, and it's, I'm not a great dancer. Well, there's a couple things a couple dances. I went to those lessons. But the thing is, what's amazing is that, it's, you never know what it's going to be. At times, people have tried to, there's one particular developer, I'm not going to name him, but he's got this giant goose statue that he had commissioned, and he's always trying to put it in a project, and we don't want it. But anyway, it's great. It's a great statue of a Canada goose, but he's always trying to it's always comes up as his public art contribution, and we really don't want it. But anyway, so you'll see it somewhere, some point with a certain developer. But anyway, someone's going to give in at some point. But we really, what we want to do is make sure those are community-derived benefits, that they make sense. And we have had public art. We have had public art adjacent or abutting a development, but it's something that we want to make sure is accessible. We want to make sure it's something that involves that input from the community. So one of the things that we're seeing is that the ward councillors on their own now, in order to ensure that the benefit makes sense for the community, some of them have taken it on their own. We've had one councillor that has had a couple of public meetings around it. I've got this proposal in here. It's a massive project, and I'll show you a picture of it in a second. Do you want? What are you thinking of? What would be the most proper use of the Section 37 benefit? And that way, they feel that they haven't gone out on their own. They're not out on a limb, and they're protected in that way. One of the things that we've done to try to be as transparent as possible and to take away that criticism that it's a behind the scenes, let's make a deal type of meeting, is to ensure that that benefit is put into the committee of the whole report. So not the earlier one. In the public hearing report, the statutory report that goes forward, we identify that Section 37 may be opportune to look at Section 37 in this location, and that gives a signal for the public, and that way we'll find out if any stakeholders, residents, community groups show up. They can flag that and say, we don't want to see Section 37 here. We want to keep it low. But what we found is that most of the time, it really depends on what it is, and stakeholders are becoming more sophisticated on this, and if it's the right type of benefit, and if it's modest increase in density, and it's not going to create a negative impact, we're getting some support on that. So the negotiation process, we don't put all of this out there because it is a negotiation process. We go to closed session. We have a closed report that talks about some of this sometimes if it's a really contentious thing, but we include in our final recommendation report to committee, we include, here's what we've arrived at, here's what the benefit is, and so it's crystal clear. And so that's another opportunity. So if members of the committee, members of the public want to come to committee and share their concerns with the approach, or they don't like whatever piece of public art that's proposed, or they don't want to see that contribution to the playhouse or whatever is proposed, they can share that with committee. Going back, it's got to be good planning or we won't support it. We want to make sure that we always take into account all the policies that are in effect for an area. And let's see, here's a really quick overview of what this is. We go for the base density. First, we try to see what is in our official plan as permitted by our Vaughan Official Plan. In your case, if there's a secondary plan or if there's an area study in the official plan that shows that density, we'll look at that. What we found is our zoning bylaws were so out of date, they were not reflecting reality. Unless there were certain situations where we had a more up-to-date zoning bylaw, say if it was in the last 10 years and there was a site-specific project that got an earlier entitlement through a public process, we would reference the zoning bylaw as well. But most of the time we went through the official plan as our way of finding the base density. We determined the buildable GFA from that base density, and we go through a land value matrix, which the appraisers help us identify, which shows the per square foot values in that area based on recent trades in land, and then we find a value that corresponds to the proposed density. And then what we do, we just simply subtract that, the proposed increase in value. And then this is an interesting part, and this was a big part of the stakeholder buy-in on this. We had a great debate with the building industry about what is the percentage to apply. We ended up, and council ended up, staff were somewhere 25 to 40%, I think, originally. We ended up at 20 to 35% to obtain industry buy-in and support for it. And that's 20 to 35% of the increase in the land value for the project. And where we apply 20 And where we apply 35 is another dance, if you want to characterize it as a dance. That's another dance that happens. And when we apply 20%, it's more for those areas where there already are existing services, where there already are amenities. Where we apply the 35%, or closer to the 35%, is when there's quite a gap, and we're trying to achieve that, make up some of the gap between the level of service, the existing level of service, and what we've got planned for the nation there. What we do with our land value matrix to make sure that it stays up to date is that we're updating it annually, and we included that in our in our reports to council. We said this is something we're going to have to update through our real estate department every that stays current through the end. We use TREB in our case because we're there. So when is it paid? And I think this is a key part of this as well, that the Section 37 contribution is for the first above grade building permit. We do ensure that it's indexed as well. We talked about the concerns from stakeholders. The first one, mostly from the development community, was that it's just too high. We can't deal with a 20 to 35%. Well, you know, we showed the research, we showed what other jurisdictions were doing, we showed that it worked, and so we've applied that. It's still very challenging. Most of the time we end up a little bit closer to the 20% than the 35%, but it's an ongoing dance discussion. The land value matrix, we are criticized that it's not flexible enough to take into account site-specific qualities. Well, that's fine. We dealt with that by creating a process, an escalation process and a resolution process, and I'll explain some of that. And there was a concern about agreeing on the base land value. It's going to cause a big delay. Well, we had to deal with those concerns, very legitimate concerns, and we had to deal with them. So how did we deal with them? If the value that we had, that base value, was contested, we set up a process for site-specific appraisals where we could request one, and if not, if we couldn't come to an agreement, we would commission a second appraisal report. And then we have, if that second appraisal report is within 15% of the first one, then the midpoint would apply. And then eventually at the outcome, again, this was a process of escalation to allow the discussion to continue. And if there's further disagreement on all this, then at the end of the day, there could be a peer review. If that doesn't work, eventually the project can go to the ONB. So, you know what, we don't want to go there. I don't think most developers want to go there nowadays. It's, I don't know how it is here for getting hearings, but I'm sure it's, there's a 9 to 12 month wait if you can even get that for pre-hearings and then get to hearings. There's it's a process getting to the board. The site-specific bylaw, we make sure that it's itemized very clearly. We make sure that agreement is put together and that the owner enters into that Section 37 agreement with the city prior to it going for final council approval. The agreement's registered on title, and that the contributions are paid prior to release of that first building permit. So our finance department will not give clearance until they have that. So we have given clearance for some site servicing, for some things like that, but we don't give any approval prior to the release of the building permit. And as was indicated, we were already there. The province has now required it through Bill 73 amendments, but you have to have that dedicated fund. So here are some of the projects. We've had, this is a BAFE Developments project where we had, if you know where the Promenade Mall is, Centre Street and Bathurst in the city of Vaughan. And the Section 37 contribution ended up being a public art installation that backs on and it goes up against a park and it's accessible to the community. There's community services that were a fund for community services. We have a nearby playhouse and we have some community space in there that needed to be upgraded. That was over and above our level of service. And then as well, because we have bus rapid transit in the area, we wanted to make sure that everyone there was passes. Now, this is something that sometimes we are able to negotiate anyhow through the normal development process, but this was something that the developer was agreeable to, and there was quite a bit of installation of hardware on the transit front too as well. There's, you can see when the buses are coming and they've got it They've got signage and they've got monitors and everything in the ground floor of the condo here. So the big issues, that's one of them. Again, which one should apply in that case? In that case, we had a great deal of services, so we were a little bit closer to the 20%. How do we value height? It's a big issue. If you have increases in height, like the GFA approach is quite clear. The methodology is quite clear for appraisal, but what do you do when it's about a question of height? That's another thing that we've had to tackle in the city. When do we provide that detail to the public? So sometimes it's never enough, but we're trying to be as transparent as possible. I mentioned about how the councillor, the discussion of the ward councillor, but there's also the ratepayers involved, the developer involved in terms of determining the community benefits. And I think we've talked about the process for resolving differences, which has been successful. In the Vaughan Metropolitan Centre, we had one of those issues with height that came up, and we ended up having to value that. What would be the premium that someone would put on this unit as it went up, and we used that as a basis for trying to extract some additional value. In this case, previous council had allowed for unlimited height in the area and density, so it was a bit challenging. In our new official plan, we had a height cap, which was really something that the airports nearby wanted, because there's a flight approach. Really, that's what happened. The airports wanted a height cap, and so we actually, in our updated official plan, brought the heights down. Previous council had put an unlimited height limit there, and so we used our new official plan height limit, and then the extra stories on top of this, we tried to value what the premiums they would charge on that. We've ended up on some of these heritage areas, and this is something that I see when I drive around Hamilton, places like Dundas, where there's a great deal of energy investment. We have areas. We have a place called Woodbridge in Vaughan, which is, and we're getting some development proposals. It really does remind me a little bit of the main street of Dundas and what's going on. Your main street's it's better, it's more vibrant, and it is more vibrant. There's more stores, but in this case, there's proposals that are coming in that are kind of of a similar scale to what you're getting in terms of proposals. We had streetscape guidelines put in place and a secondary plan that was approved that established some guidance around height. We have a heritage conservation district in the area. So on this file that came in, we were able to work to include streetscape improvements, privately owned, publicly accessible open space, and we had the renovation and relocation of 2 heritage buildings. And so the cost of some of that, upgrading that was part of the benefits. So what we ended up getting out of this was that publicly accessible open space. That was something the community wanted. That was the benefit that came out of it in terms of the relocation of the houses. However, on this one, we actually had an interesting thing that happened. The community changed, and I know this happens in the planning process. A certain element of the community was on board with us going ahead at the official plan stage, and we actually were smart enough to secure the benefit with the change in the official plan. What happened was that there were some adjustments and changes to that project that some members of the community didn't like, or they came on at a later stage of the process, and so they've actually, they're up in arms now, and that particular person leading the charge is running for council, I think, next term. And so there's a whole movement now at the site plan and zoning process. The project resulted, there was hundreds of people that showed up at the community meeting for the site plan and zoning process, but the official plan had already gone through the process. So I think it spoke to me, there's a valuable lesson there. You should try to secure these Section 37 benefits at the earliest possible opportunity, get it locked down, and ensure that it's locked down and you get that agreement. And in this case, because it was subject to a Vaughan Official Plan appeal, we were able to get it secured at the official plan stage. And because you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen with the community. You don't know if the site's going to be sold to someone else, and they're going to come in with a slightly adjusted proposal, something new and different that's not going to match with the community. And so it was a valuable lesson learned. So at least at a minimum, we have an agreement for some of this. And even if things change dramatically, I think, you know, at the OMB, if it's contested, it'll I hope, stand up. So how will we move forward? Again, this is a relatively recent thing in the city of Vaughan. It's you know, dealing with this wave of intensification. But what we'll do to maintain, continue, and to continuously improve is that we will continuously report to committee on this, and we have committed to do a report. It's coming up at the end of this year. We'll start and finish by the first quarter of 2017, and we'll discuss all these challenges. But we're open for suggestions for improvement, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to share some of our lessons learned with you here today. So thank you very much, and I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, John, and I do have a speaker's list for clarification. Councillor Collins first, Councillor Farr, and then myself.
Thanks, Madam Chairman, and through you to John. John, great presentation. How often is Section 37 used in terms of percentage of projects that might come forward in a calendar year? Is it a rare occurrence? Is it something that's in 10 or 15% of the applications? Do you have a ballpark figure?
Okay, so we probably have about 220 development applications, OP rezoning type applications that would come through the city in a year. We're in these intensification areas, we're probably only around 10 to 15 of those would be of a scale, of a size that would prompt a Section 37 discussion. Maybe 15. I mean, it's probably around 15 to 20 maximum of that.
You talked a lot about how you determine the value of the contribution that's made by the applicant or the developer. In terms of the discussion that occurs prior to that, there must be a determination as to whether or not it's actually worth accepting the increased density, and whether or not you want to, I don't want to say abandon your plan or the principles that you have, but at what point in time does the municipality or the community say that, you know what, we have a plan in place and there are limits, and that plan is updated regularly, so it's not as if you're working from a plan that's decades old. And so at what point in time do the planning principles override the fact that you're essentially playing a Monty Hall, let's make a deal kind of scenario where you're negotiating, and the developers, provided a carrot in front of the municipality, in whatever form that might be, and then you're left to say, to determine whether or not you uphold the principles of your zoning bylaws or your density caps that you may have in place, or deviate from them for this, whatever that prize is. How is that handled from a bureaucratic standpoint? Politically, but
thank you very much for the question. It's an excellent question. I think one of the things that we as staff look at very carefully in those types of situations is the context. For example, in a more historic village setting in the city of Vaughan, in the Kleinberg area, if many of you have been there, there's the McMichael Gallery, and there's, I guess, that historic village type feel. We do have significant intensification planned by the development community. With the city, we actually didn't identify it as an intensification area. I think we identified an extra 350 people. It's not an area where we want to see intensification in that area as staff, and our official plan speaks to that. So I think a big part of it is that official plan process. So if your official plan has led you to, and that's been a community driven process, and all those supporting studies has led you to the point where you don't want to see that intensification, that speaks volumes to staff. Having said that, In some cases, if it is a very minor type of thing and that, ratepayers group is on board with it and they go to the councillor, the ward councillor, and they communicate at the committee meetings that they're okay with some modest intensification in exchange for a Section 37 benefit. And in that case, there is an Islington streetscape plan that isn't funded and that the BIA wants to have done, but it's over and above level surface. There might be an opportunity to utilize it. I haven't seen that yet. I've seen more community interest against intensification that's been communicated to committee, to council, and as a result, we have not done Section 37 agreements in Kleinburg. In other parts of the city, for example, and most people are familiar with this, it's one of the only places my wife will come with me. She gets car sick when she goes to other places with me, of course, but it's Vaughan Mills Mall. So near Vaughan Mills Mall, we have, so in Vaughan Mills Mall, across on the east side of Jane Street, there's some, and around the out parcels of Vaughan Mills Mall, there's some major development projects in the works. And because of, there is no adjacent low-rise neighborhood, there's mass transit planned, there's the subway that's opening up in a year from now just down the street with rapid bus transit on Jane Street planned, and there's access to all the highways, et cetera, et cetera. There's no real impact from a height planning perspective that we can't mitigate. There are some issues related to community services and the lack of nearby community services that we're trying to address through Section 37. So because we have to address that need for community space or indoor community space, for example, soccer is a big deal in Vaughan. People want some indoor play areas or they want some inside community space. That's an opportunity that if we can get some of that built into a podium or into a city facility next to that project, that's an opportunity to look at the use of Section 37 for some increase in height and density, because there is no, there won't be a big impact on the community. So we do have to set that GFA through a secondary plan. In this case, we set most of that at 3 times and a max height of 22 stories, but we do have projects that have come in at 30+ stories and with a higher GFA, and so that's an opportunity if council is of the mind to do so to look at Section 37. So it really is in large part based on context, based on the community interest. We've had, big public hearings, and there's only been 1 or 2 deputants come forward when they're talking about 16 buildings in that very location opposing the height and density. And so there isn't that much of a big community reaction. And so when council's looking at this, and then they'll go out to Kleinburg and there'll be 100 people that'll show up for a meeting and there'll be 20 people making deputations, council will be aware of, and the staff are watching quite closely as to what that reaction is, and we take that into account as to whether or not Section 37 is a possibility or not.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks. My last question, John, is related to, I've read with interest the experiences of GTA municipalities with Section 37. And I know that Mayor Tory's been critical of that process in terms of characterizing it as a situation of the haves and the have-nots. And so in areas where there's density and applications for higher densities, we see the community improvements, and you've listed some here today, but in other neighborhoods where those densities just don't make sense and those applications aren't in front of the municipality, those communities aren't seeing those indoor soccer areas, playgrounds, transit improvements. How has Vaughan dealt with that situation, or are you still early in the game with that whole issue of certain neighborhoods will benefit from this because it's geographically specific, while others who are not in those areas of economic uplift and higher densities seem to be shut out of that process? Through
John?
Yes, through the chair. I think one of the things is that it is in large part what we're seeing, the market is in many ways reacting to the investments in transit and the availability of gray field sites that they can redevelop. So it's largely market driven. So it's one of those things that, and I think Ken Greenberg in his book talked about it as urban judo. You really don't. You really just have to take that energy and direct it in a way that makes sense. And in some cases, in some of those areas, there just isn't that opportunity, and the market isn't there. But what we are seeing, surprisingly sometimes, is that the market is looking at sites where we didn't have intensification planned. The market's looking at that for maybe a seniors housing project, a market housing project, or something like that. And in those cases, it might be an opportunity to apply some sort of Section 37 benefit in an area that we hadn't planned. If the impacts, or if it's good planning and there are some services available. So it's one of those things that we're still working through. I think that's fair. We're working through this. It's early days, and it's something that we have to watch closely, the market, and then be in a position to respond. And so we're still learning.
Councillor?
Thanks for that. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Farr, clarification. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Is it only clarification?
No, you
question?
may ask your question.
Thank you. Through you to John.
Clarification.
Your new OP, hopefully you can clarify, through the chair, says that the urban boundary expansion is only 3% in the coming years?
We're going to find out more about that at 2 o'clock today, or 1 o'clock, when the ministers make their announcement on the updated plans. We are, like you, creatures of the province, and I think much of what we will expand or not expand is dependent upon the density targets that we get when we do our sensitivity analysis, and depending on the targets for intensification that we will get from the province. And I'm assuming we're going to get that today at this afternoon when the ministers make their announcement about the outcome of the consolidated plan reviews, the land use plan reviews. That'll determine that. So right now, what has happened though, and I'll tell you, it's even though we have a number of blocks planned for urban expansion already, we had a regional official plan amendment that was approved, because we have a two-tier system, and there's been some I guess, concerns from the region about financing new infrastructure without development coming on board quickly. What we've seen is the region, our upper tier, saying that we want to make sure that there's a cost sharing to get the services there, or some of that is cost shared. And so what we've actually seen is a bit of a time delay. So we haven't expanded out. So that in itself is actually increasing the pressure for intensification and making projects like this and these types of community issues are coming to the fore, because there's a great deal more emphasis on intensification projects.
That's where I was going. I mean, your OP through you, Chair, is going to be focused on what I'm reading, 45% of new development is intensification. Right. There's the starting point, I would assume, for your engagement and your consultation. It's kind of happening anyway.
Correct. Through the chair, it's correct. Our intensification is going to happen. I just think it's a question of, it may go to 50, it may go higher. Based on what I'm hearing from the province, it looks like it may go higher, and so that's where we're going to be in this discussion. And intensification, it's going to continue on. It's going to become even more of an issue. Councillor.
We hear a lot of ads about the city above Toronto, the city of Vaughan. I was fascinated in advance of the meeting here today to realize that you're not as big as I thought, but you're certainly getting big fast with 68% of your growth between 2006 and 2031, and getting upwards to about 450K. So how does that play a role, this massive and very quick growth in this discussion, this Section 37 discussion? Aside from
John?
Yes, through the chair, it's one of those things where what we're seeing now in the city is that on pretty much every corner where there's an opportunity, and we're seeing a lot of, I'd say a lot of grayfield, strip plaza, commercial plazas being redeveloped, where some of the longer term, and some of these are the commercial REITs, even like a RioCan or someone like that has a long-term interest in the land. We're seeing where smart REIT, smart centers, that group of companies, they will be, they had an asset. It has produced a great deal of value for them from a one-story commercial type project. So what we're seeing is a lot of these gray fields being the focus of redevelopment, particularly on transit corridors. So I think that's what's prompting us to look at the opportunity. And in some of these areas, it has been largely a commercial area, but now there's transit, and so that's why the Section 37 discussion and some of the other tools that you're seeing that will be discussed today, it's becoming such an important part of city building. We really have to take into account the level of service or lack of services and see if we can make up the difference. We have been traditionally a greenfield community, and the level of service, the historic levels of service have really been to cater to that greenfield community. And now all of a sudden, you know, you see these beautiful images of you know, enhanced streetscapes and people having coffee and you know, sitting on a beautiful park bench and nice trees with the Silva-Sacs feeding them. It's all of these things that, you know, they are a long-term operating cost for our various public works departments, and all these things have to be taken into account. So the Section 37, it's just a part of the effort to try to make up that difference.
Thank you, Councillor.
And I'm glad you mentioned transit. You opened by saying essentially, quote, you are the beneficiaries on major investments in transit, end quote. And so I guess the higher order of transit along whatever corridor, the higher the heights, the densities, and that's part of this mix as well?
Yes, through the chair. Yes, through the chair. That's been a big part of this. And we have had those secondary plan processes. Ironically, we've had areas where, and I'm sure this may have happened in Hamilton, where people did not want to see higher heights and densities along the transit corridors. This happened in Vaughan, where we had people that actually didn't want the transit in their neighborhood. But it's a reality that it was coming anyway, and so we at the planning and growth group, we tried to find a way to find a balance in those areas. And so maybe the height was only 1.5 or the density was only 1.5 or 2 times whatever we could achieve on that corridor, recognizing the community concerns. And we had height limits of 4 stories, but we set up a framework, or 6 stories, sorry. We set up a framework where if they did certain things to exceed that, and those were clearly listed in those area studies, those Section 37 benefits were clearly listed. So that was the opportunity during those processes. We tried to coordinate with the transit agencies and do charrettes and explain this transit is coming to this area. We know it's going to prompt a market response. We know that people are going to come in with 8 or 10 or 12 or 15-story buildings. We'll set up an official plan framework for 6 stories, but we'll allow for 8 or something of that and some additional density if there's the following designs principles adhered to, and if there's the following community benefits that are very clearly articulated that the developer is open to achieve.
Councillor?
Nice to hear that kind of confidence. They don't guess, they know that the transit's going to bring 8 or 10 or 12-story buildings. We like hearing that here in Hamilton. It's very reassuring, trust me. Through you, Chair, to John, you said something about the developer saying, as it relates now to affordable housing, just a few more questions and more specific to affordable housing. As part of our conversation here, we have tremendous challenges in Hamilton, and Vaughan, I'm sure, is no exception. I'm sure you're not of those rumors we've heard for years where to solve the issue of poverty, you give them a one-way bus ticket to this city. I hope not anyway. But
John, will you confirm?
Through you, no, don't do that. I don't want to get into that. You said some of the developers, as it related to affordable housing as a Section 37 incentive, found it to be a stigma issue. Can you expand on that? Like, what do you have specific examples where this was an issue?
Well, the specific example, through the chair to the council, the specific example was related to projects on Yonge Street in the municipality of Richmond Hill. We have a couple in progress, but they haven't quite landed. We're in the middle of mediation. I can't really speak to them, but there are ones in Richmond Hill that did land on Yonge Street where there was projects that part of the Section 37 benefit ended up being, in exchange for that height and density, multiple units that were then conveyed fee simple ownership to the housing provider. In this case, it was York Region as a housing provider, and so that was how it was conveyed. And it seems to have worked well. It helped. I mean, it's a modest achievement of Section 37. It's a modest way of getting some of that affordable housing stock, but it is. I mean, it's just the key thing was having a frame of reference, trying to get a quantum agreed on between the developer, between the people negotiating that benefit, and that's always the key thing, is trying to get, and in most of these that I've been involved in, all these Ontario Municipal Board processes, it's, you know, we're always ending up this battle to get a number. I think at most of the time you can talk about how the number will be applied and what that use will be, but it still is a big battle to get that number. So, you know, my advice in speaking to your council is that having some of that thought about getting a good appraisal methodology and working through some of those processes, so that way it's less of an onerous battle to get to that number, is a big part of this policy development.
In your case, having that 20 to 35% in the matrix is helpful too, I'm sure, through you, Chair. Through
the Chair, yes, it is helpful to have that range and having council support. I can't tell you how important it is as staff. When you walk into the room and know that you've got your council, when you've got your council behind you and that they have that policy and they've deliberately said they don't want to get involved in the process. We had some earlier challenges, some hiccups where we hadn't developed our Section 37 protocol and our guidelines to the point that we wanted to, and so there were some ad hoc development agreements that were made and Section 37 agreements that you know, I won't call them knee-jerk, but they reflected a community interest, but they weren't properly supported by staff, by the methodology that I spoke of, the appraisal methodology, and I was a little concerned about that for council. It creates a bit of a risk that a member of council could be criticized. So I think the key thing is getting that figure, getting a way that you can ask staff to conduct the work that they need to conduct, and if they know that you have council support and they know that they have council support behind them, it helps a great deal as you go into those negotiating processes.
Thank you. Councillor?
Through you. So just so I'm clear, I thought I heard you say there's about 10 to 15 developments currently ongoing in Vaughan, and of them 2 are quietly negotiating an affordable housing component?
Yes, we're working on trying to get more of that. I know our mayor is very keen on affordable housing. He wants that to be a bigger part of the discussion. There are some logistical challenges, though. I mean, it is a negotiation. So it is in some of these cases we're in mediation. We're trying to come to an outcome that works, and some people just didn't want to have affordable housing. But I think if you can find the right way to, and you know, with the right developer, I think it's possible. I think it's just depending on the circumstances and the specific instances. And I think that strong council commitment on that, if that's an objective that council is really keen on pursuing, staff will make that center in the negotiation.
Thank you.
Sorry, so I'm clear, John, and I'm not trying to put you on the hot seat, but welcome to Hamilton.
Well, I've been here before in the hot seat. He's reminding me when I see Brad, I remember being on the hot seat. Yeah.
Well, if Brad was here, no doubt there was a hot seat. Through you, Chair, you just said some people didn't want to have affordable housing. Are you referring to the developers or the community at large? Through the Chair,
it's been mostly the developer. They, in most cases, the developer wanted to achieve, you know, a certain type of niche, or they were tailoring to a certain type of market, and they didn't want to introduce any affordable housing units in the project. You know, we're working through that with a couple of the sites that we're involved in right now.
Yeah. So that sums up the stigma reference earlier.
That's right, and it's unwarranted. I mean, when you're talking affordability, I mean, these are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, it's I don't quite understand it, but it's something that we're still working through.
But I'm glad you are, and it's great to hear your mayor is tackling it as well. We certainly have a mayor here that's all over the issue, as well as I would suggest all of us around this table and all of council. Finally, and this may be the craziest question of all, through you to John, I'm seeing a whole lot of the funds or the projects, Section 37 projects, the bonusing, going towards projects that are capital in nature. And forgive me if I'm not fully aware of how it works. We will be soon, and we'll learn from your mistakes there in Vaughan. But can you not throw operating dollars at, you know, existing and well thought of institutions in a city for Section 37?
Yeah, excellent question. Right now, we have not been doing that in our experience, and I have not seen, now I have seen, or I know of certain things in the City of Toronto where there have been instances where there's been programs that certain councillors have negotiated, and we decided not to do that. We just thought it would be much clearer and transparent to see that it was, you know, it's a capital project of this. What we wanted to ensure was, and what we try to do, say for example, it is a public art project adjacent to a condominium and or something like that. We may try to negotiate a use agreement where there's some sort of obligation or there's a joint obligation for maintenance to help offset that publicly accessible private open space. Those POPs situations that I showed you a picture of in that one in Woodbridge is one where the condominium corp, there'll be some, I guess, joint operational stewardship of that space, and that will offset and reduce the amount of operational funds expended, because that's a huge concern. We don't want to create these beautiful streetscapes that are then going to bankrupt us from an operating perspective. So more and more, I think this is another thing, this could be another focus of another session in the future, is how do you protect ourselves from being on the hook for a higher level of service? And I think it's accepting and making sure that there's an obligation in those open spaces for a private role in making sure that that level of service is maintained. If everyone's desirable of that beautiful looking open space or that pleasant streetscape, I think it's there's something to be said for having some joint management and stewardship of it from an operating perspective so that the city remains whole.
Thank you. Councillor Skelly.
Thank you. Through the chair, John, what is the current population of Vaughan?
We're at about 320,000.
And how many affordable housing units do you have?
Through the chair, I do not know. We are conducting studies of that. We have a secondary suite study that finished that identified, I think it was around 15,000, 20,000, but we actually don't have an exact number of how many affordable housing units that I can give you right now. And if there is one, I haven't seen it yet.
But you, through the chair, you think it could be around 15?
Oh no, I'm just talking about secondary suites, because that's fresh information where we've actually completed a study that identified secondary suites where people are being accommodated in and living in dwellings as a secondary suite, but we do have, we don't have an accurate number right now that I can reference. And I know there may be something there that, and hopefully with some more information coming out, we'll have that, but I don't have one on my, that I can give you.
Thank you. Through the chair, can you very briefly explain how the transit system works in Vaughan?
How our transit system works?
Bus Rapid Transit?
Yes, so we have an operator. It's York Region Rapid Transit that is the primary operator, but we also have TTC buses that run up and down through the city of Vaughan that have arrangements with York Region Rapid Transit Company, which is the York Region operator. So York Region Rapid Transit has a so we have a number of different services running through the municipality. Like you, we have Metrolinx, we have their buses, we have their trains that are running through our municipality, but we also have the TTC. We have, in some cases, Brampton Transit running through parts of our city because they're adjacent municipality, not unlike Burlington, I guess, coming into Hamilton. But we also, the interesting piece is the Toronto Transit Commission seeing a transit bus 20 kilometers up into the city of Vaughan, almost in King. They actually go all the way up to King Township in some cases and turn around and come back down on the lines. So there's operating agreements between them. The bus rapid transit that I spoke of, That is a part, it's called Viva Rapid Co., and they're a rapid transit, it's part of York Region, and they're a corporation that was set up to work through the bus rapid transit and the development of bus rapid transit lines along, it would have been Highway 7, east-west and north-south. They run buses on Yonge Street and in other those major arterial corridors throughout the region.
Councillor?
Through the chair, and how is that being received? What is your ridership like on the bus rapid transit?
I don't know the ridership. I can tell you that I'm sorry, I don't know what the ridership numbers are right now. But I think with all-day, two-day service, with it's bound to increase, and we're seeing the market respond to that as well. We're seeing quite a bit of development around the transit stations now.
Through the chair, I wanted to focus on that. Have you noticed a correlation between bus rapid transit and residential development, commercial
through the chair, yes, quite a bit of correlation. We're finding that pretty much every available space along those corridors that is ready for development, and we've seen, single-family homes, 3 of them strung together, assembled, and an 8-story building will pop up, a 10-story building. People will start at 15, and eventually through a community process, we may end up at 8 or 10 or something like that. But along these bus rapid transit corridors, there's a huge amount of interest, and it's prompting a lot of redevelopment along those corridors.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you very much. Through you to John, thanks very much for the presentation. It's interesting to actually see what Vaughan has done in the process they've gone through. Can you tell me, I'm most interested at this point in the affordable housing, because you did touch on some other things that I had interest about, but I did declare I'm interested in the affordable housing, and I am. So when you use Section 37 for affordable housing in Vaughan, is it geared specifically to the inclusion of affordable housing within the building that's being built? Is it geared to something within the ward, or is it geared citywide? So
what we're doing, and I haven't landed these agreements yet, so I don't want to jinx them. Yeah, that's a good word. Yeah, I don't want to jinx the agreements. But what it is specifically, it's related to the developments in question. It's geared exactly towards the development. We're trying to monetize the increased height and density. In the case that I'm dealing with, we had a height and density established around 20 stories. The developer seeking 33, 34 stories, and a much higher GFA. They're looking at something like 5.5 times when we had 3 times and 3.5 times, I think it was, in the secondary plan for the area. So what we're trying to do is what that difference is that I spoke of, that quantum, within that range of that difference, we're trying to apply that to an affordable housing component of the building. So what we're trying to do is similar to what Richmond Hill did, is take that value from the increased height and density and apply it towards the affordable housing units. So that way the region would then take on ownership of those affordable housing units, and they would be something within a condominium corporation. The region would be an owner within that condominium corporation of units that they can then utilize for their purposes. And that's how we're doing it right now. There may be other ways to do it, but right now we've tried to work off what has been approved in Richmond Hill, our neighboring municipality to the east, and we're trying to lever that and to use that process for getting affordable housing units built into condos.
Councillor?
Thank you. And through the chair, are you getting a lot of resistance to that?
John?
Yes.
So just on that same subject, through the chair to you, John, have you looked at what I understand Toronto is doing, which is basically saying that value that is over and above, that would be the 20 to 35% in Vaughan's case, can be applied citywide to the restoration of affordable housing units, to new affordable housing units, city housing type situations, which is something that we are very focused on. at this point. So have you given any consideration to that, or have you not gotten that far?
We haven't gotten that far. It's been mostly focused on the specific development itself, but it's a good suggestion. I mean, it's something that we have a mayor and members of council that are very keen on achieving affordable housing in some way, and so it's something that perhaps we can have some more discussions on.
Councillor? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Pearson, if you don't mind taking the chair, please. I just have a few questions myself. John, thank you very much for coming. I know you need to get back for a great announcement, so I will be brief. In your presentation, and even the previous speaker's presentation, you talked about public consultation. You talked the value about it. In my experience, it's cost effective because you narrow down the project a lot quicker, especially when the community buys in. And then you talk about your lesson learned, that stakeholder support. So part of your stakeholders group, did it include public consultation, or was it specifically to developers and your staff?
Through the chair to the chair. What we did was public consultation was a big part of this. We had our Vaughan Official Plan, which was a larger official plan process that had public consultation, but I think what we really needed to do was to explain the value in developing our protocol and developing our guidelines. What we had to do was build in and make clear when the public had an opportunity to participate and to share their concerns about whether or not Section 37 and a Section 37 approach makes sense or not in a certain locale. I think we're still learning. Some members of the community at the very latest stage will come out and say, well, no, this shouldn't have been, you shouldn't be thinking about a higher height and density in this area for whatever reason they have. But what we would say is, well, we indicated in the public hearing report that this was coming. There has been typically, in some of those more sensitive environments, council may direct a community meeting, or the councillor will hold a community meeting to deal with what is of concern and what potential Section 37 benefits might be, and it comes up through that way. But you can never. I guess this is one of the things that we're having a challenge with. This: how much can you convey? You're having a detailed real estate negotiation with a landowner, so how much can be public? And so I think what we've decided on in our experience is to put the conclusion of that in the final recommendation report. So we'll put the conclusion of that negotiation, where we can get to as staff and the developer, put that into that recommendation report, so when it goes to committee for consideration before council approval, there's that one last opportunity for the public to share their concerns and for council to make a decision based on what they hear at that meeting. So I think, as far as I can tell, it's the most transparent methodology in Ontario for now, because it's so recent, and I think we wanted to learn based on the work of others. It's the most transparent way of getting at that. We still have residents that will show up and voice concerns with that. It's not enough detail. We want to know what went on behind the scenes. We want to know how it changed throughout the negotiation process, but we feel we can't disclose that because of the nature of the discussions.
Okay, thank you. And through you to the chair, or to John, you're speaking more site-specific. And it's been our experience, and I'm sure all my colleagues around the table will tell you that they've been to public meetings, public community information centers, where 300 people angry will show up. And then when you go down the pipe, after you've done your public consultation over and over again, you may end up with just 2 or 3 that are just not happy. So it's still a far cry from the 300 at the beginning. But I guess my question was, public consultation to actually devise the policy and the framework, solidify it, and make the language so specific so that it's there. By the time you get there, that is your map going forward. Is there a lot of public consultation to get to that framework for the city as a whole, or the ward as a whole, so that when applications, site-specific, come forward, then you have this policy to fall back on, and it's very specific policy.
Yes, there is, and I think it's because it's woven into the secondary plan development. So that official plan, secondary plan development will include the discussion, and I think it's really important to get it on the table and to get some input from the community at that stage of the planning process, those various meetings, statutory, non-statutory meetings. Put it on the table, have it discussed through your community processes, and that will help. You'll tease out what is of real concern to the community, where you can have a win-win. That's been very important to have that discussion. And then after that, I think what was really important was, you know, developing that official plan framework with the input of stakeholders, but then also having the more, I'd say, it's more of a nuanced discussion with the industry, with the development community, with some of the more sophisticated community stakeholders, ratepayers, different communities of interest, to develop that protocol, that Section 37 protocol, and to make that council policy. That protocol is a council policy. It's not a statutory thing. It's more of a council policy. It's not a planning act thing. But having that council support on that protocol, that implementation guideline, matched with that community input on the secondary plan that led you to the community benefits, I think the combination of the two, which involves community input, varying degrees of community input, more on this, probably more on figuring out what the benefits are on this side of the table first, that has been absolutely key to us being able to have the successes we've been able to have as we work for the first few years of this in the city of Vaughan.
Thank you. And when you talk about your Section 37 contributions, one of the bullet points was a transit pass. Are we talking a yearly one? Are we talking life as you're there, or is it all site-specific again?
Certain councillors feel differently about certain things, and so there is some specifics related to it, and most of it's been for the first year, but I can see that some councillors are pushing for more, and it's something that you know, and we consult with the York Region Rapid Transit group that I mentioned before to the question from Councillor Scully. We consult with them and say, is this an appropriate use of the funds? Is this appropriate use of the Section 37 funds? And so I think that's very helpful, is to get those, get the ridership up. It's really important actually too, when you think about it, if people walk into a building and the building is, you know, it's a smart building, they can see when the bus is on its way in there, there's monitors at the bottom of it, they know when it's all coming, they walk in, they have a pass from day one, they have a pass, they have you know, the amenity, they have a good safe place to sit and wait for the bus to come. I think that's one of the things that we found has been helpful in trying to increase the ridership. Again, I don't know the exact percentage on these modal splits, and they are very specific. Everyone's got a transit study to support whatever modal split they're seeking, but it's one of these things that has been helpful in getting some of those buildings from day one on transit and getting them using our services.
Okay, thank you for your questions, and I'll take the chair back. And are there any other questions? Seeing none. Again, John, thank you so much for coming, and I know you need to rush back. Councillor Farr, Councillor Skelly, all those in favor. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, and good luck on your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much.